I'm Susan Flory, and this is The Big Middle, where we explore the big issues of longer midlife. When my job disappeared in my 50s, I didn't worry. I'd been a good saver. The future was exciting, unknown. Let the next adventure begin. I hadn't heard of ageism until it bit me hard. CVs were devoured whole by the internet job robots. And there was no asking former colleagues for an inside line on a shiny new job. Most were long gone, clapped out or forced out of the TV news game. I didn't want to play anymore anyway. When I started digging into the plight of older workers, I found this: 55, unemployed, and faking normal. The TEDx Talk of my guest, Elizabeth White.
You know me. I am in your friendship circle, hidden in plain sight. My clothes are still impeccable, bought in the good years when I was still making money. To look at me, you would not know that my electricity was cut off last week for non-payment, or that I meet the eligibility requirements for food stamps. But if you paid attention, you would see that sadness in my eyes, hear that hint of fear in my otherwise self-assured voice. These days, I'm buying the $1.99 trial-size jug of Tide to make ends meet. I bet you didn't know laundry detergent came in that size. You invite me to the same expensive restaurants the two of us have always enjoyed, but I order mineral water now with a twist of lemon, not the $12 glass of Chardonnay. I am frugal in my menu choices, meticulous. I count every penny in my head. I demur dividing the table bill evenly to cover desserts and designer coffees and second and third glasses of wine I did not consume. I am tired of trying to fake appearances. A friend told me that I'm broke, not poor, and there is a difference. I live without cable, my gym membership, and nail appointments. I've discovered I can do my own hair. There is no retirement savings, no nest egg. I exhausted that long ago. There is no expensive condo to draw equity, and no husband to back me up. Months of slow pay and no pay have decimated my credit. Bill collectors call constantly, reading verbatim from a script before expressing polite sympathy for my plight and then demanding payment arrangements I can't possibly meet. Friends wonder privately how someone so well educated could be in economic freefall. I'm still as talented as ever and smart as a whip, but work is sketchy now, mostly on and off consulting gigs. At 55, I've learned how to fake cheeriness, but there are not many opportunities for work anymore. I don't remember exactly when it stopped, but I cannot deny now having entered the uncertain world of formerly and used to be. I'm not sure anymore where I belong. What I do know is that dozens of online job applications seem to just disappear into a black hole. I'm wondering what is to become of me. So far, my health has held up, but my body aches, or is it my spirit?
Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello, Susan.
We're finally connecting down the Skype line from your home in Washington, D.C. So happy to have you on The Big Middle.
And I'm so happy to be here.
That talk that you gave was so powerful. A cry of pain, few facing similar, dare to share, very courageous.
Thank you. Many people say it's courageous, but at the time, I didn't really feel I was being courageous.
When I first heard it, classic impulse, I needed to share it. I sent it to family and friends, and it was me saying, look, it's not just me. Honestly, it's not my fault.
Many people have said that to me, and that was exactly the impact I wanted it to have.
It's been a couple of years and a couple of books since you exposed your plight. Before you tell us how your spirit is now, tell us about your CV, your resume.
So I've had a really cool career, zigging and zagging. I have an undergraduate degree from Oberlin College. I then got a master's from Johns Hopkins School of International Studies. I have a Harvard MBA. I've been an entrepreneur. I owned a chain of decorative home stores in New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. worked at the World Bank for a number of years, generally had a career in international development, and working at places like the African Development Foundation. I've been a C-suite executive, just delicious career until I hit my mid-50s.
And what happened then?
The Great Recession. I was, at that time, this was before the gig economy, in 2002, I had two great consultancies. One was supposed to last for 7 months, lasted actually 7 years. The other was supposed to be 1 year, lasted for 4. That combined income was good by Washington, D.C. standards. And then Great Recession hits 2008, 2009. What happens? Companies retrench. Who goes first? The consultants. I lost both of those jobs within 6 months, and my income went to zero, and I was in my mid-50s, and it was crickets. Phone stopped ringing. Exactly what you described in your intro.
And were you in denial for quite a while? I would imagine it's the same stages as grief. You just go, no, this is me. I'm successful. Look at me. I've always been successful. I've had some hard knocks, but I'm going to get through this.
It was exactly that. In fact, when people asked me, do I have any regrets, the one that I do feel is not recognizing that the whole story had shifted on me suddenly, not recognizing it soon enough. So what happens is that you keep trying all the things you used to try. You keep networking, you keep redoing your CV, you dye your hair, you call people, set up these little coffees, you write the compelling letter to CEOs, and just nothing is working. And you do that, some are doing that months, if not years, before you recognize that you need to really shift gears.
Tell me about the process of putting on your faking normal mask, how you wore it and when you decided that's enough, no more pretense.
My faking normal mask was really good because with my past career, I lived in a great neighborhood. I had the clothes that went with the positions that I've had. I traveled a lot. I had the education, so I could fake normal longer than some people, would be able to. And what happened was when your income starts to plummet, you begin to make shifts. And I started to notice shifts in friends as well. So, for example, you're in the car with a friend and you notice she's putting $6 of gas in her SUV. This is a clue. Or you're with someone who would normally order a glass of Chardonnay and they're ordering mineral water. Or someone is declining an invitation and you who would normally come with you to a restaurant, or someone doesn't invite you into their home and you find out later they're having some kind of plumbing issue that they're embarrassed about because they haven't been able to repair it. So women talk. These were friends of mine, and we started to speak candidly about what was happening to us. And that's actually what led to the essay at the top of the show, was me describing what it feels like to land here, to have had career choice and decent incomes and suddenly be looking at downward mobility.
How bad did it get? Were you on food stamps?
I had a period of time where I was on food stamps. Had it not been for my mother, I think my house would have been at risk. At one point, I had a roommate. Just a general downward mobility. Now, what's happened since I started writing openly about my own experience, I've been hearing from lots of people. It can get far worse than it did for me. I mean, I hear about from people who are living in their cars. I hear from people who have lost their homes. I hear from people whose marriages have collapsed. So it's the full range of experience of downward mobility that none of the people that I'm talking to expected to be experiencing themselves.
The ubiquity of it is quite stunning, and it's something that I've discovered since I started researching and, refining the concept of my podcast. I'm interested, before things started to look up and before you could take the wider measure of the problem, how dark did your thoughts go when it felt futile to keep hoping that all your efforts would eventually get you back to your normal life?
So what happens is you go to a place of despair because what used to work just is not working. What was helpful to me, I had a couple of friends who were in the same situation who could remind me who I was and what I knew. When you start to spiral, you start to doubt yourself, you start to wonder if you will work again. Everything is looking sort of dismal and flat. The tools that you're used to using that had always worked for you before. I mean, I've described my background. This is the kind of background that gives you access. I had the kind of network that I would hear about jobs before they were posted. So when all that shifts on you, when the game changes in the fourth quarter, I was not ready for it. I think many of us are not ready for it. We're not having the conversation. The reason I use faking normal in the title of my book is that so many of us are pretending we are more okay than we are.
Well, the thing is, it takes us all by surprise. The game has changed, the goalposts have moved, but no one's really told us, before it happens to us and marginalizes us and sidelines us, no one told us really that population superaging was rendering retirement a relic.
It's true. I mean, we are in a period of a new normal. And there's a reason it looks so crazy. We've never been here before. Never have people lived as long as we're living. And there's what they talk about, they call it the active lifespan. We're living longer in relatively good health. I'm 65 now, and my 65 is not the same as my grandmother's 65. And we are expecting 40 years of work to finance an additional sort of 25, 30 years of living. And that math just doesn't work. And there are millions of us, 40% in the US, it's estimated that 40% of near retirees are looking at downward mobility. And this contrast with what I consider the positive aging happy talk message that we sort of get from the media, where you see the older couple clinking their champagne glasses on some cruise, or the beaming boomers standing in front of the recently bought pizza parlor, or the lawyer turned pastry chef, all these cool reinvention stories that are not the reality for many of us.
And the shame and the blame that is visited upon everyone who finds themselves suddenly in this situation, and they're incredulous because, I was the same as you. I didn't give it a second thought. I just said, I'm going to find something. Now's my time to really reflect, take my time, do what I want. I didn't realize that the world had a different idea.
I think we live, there's this sort of, I call it the bootstrap ingenuity. We love these stories of the, poor guy who's walking 10 miles a day to work and 10 miles back. And finally, his company buys him some, little rundown car, and he makes the news and everybody's happy with that. This pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But here's the thing. Our bootstrap ingenuity is no match for stagnant wages. It's no match for escalating cost in healthcare or housing. And I say to people, what's happening to boomers now is not a pesky little boomer problem, that Gen Xers and millennials also don't have pensions. And bootstrap ingenuity is not going to address some of these large systemic problems that are creating the situation we're in.
Well, this is the whole focus of my podcast. These are structural faults, and we do not operate in a vacuum. So the new normal across the generations is financial precarity. You know, the certainties that we had in our careers, education, good jobs, we're on a roll, they're gone. Do you think younger people are aware enough of this?
This is why I think they are aware. They are our children. My daughter is 33 years old. She is a millennial. And I think that our children are seeing that mom and dad, who used to maybe help with a down payment on a house or used to be able to help with picking up an air ticket here and there. Even this weekend, I have my grandson. I have to ask my daughter now to contribute to feeding him. There was a time I would just take him for the weekend and I'd be responsible for feeding and entertaining him. I now can't do that. So they see what's happening to us boomers, their parents.
Yes, it's not the way we've been conditioned. This flips the script completely for all of us. I want to take a measure of the progress that can be found in the titles of your two books, Elizabeth. You published the first one, 55 Unemployed and Faking Normal, yourself in 2017. But your new book, 55 Underemployed and Faking Normal, relatively more work for you then?
So what happened was I did the You Know Her essay, and it made its way to the PBS Facebook page. And within 3 days, it had 11,000 likes and 1,000 comments. And I remember being stunned by that because I thought I was writing about myself and a relatively, friends of mine and maybe a small group of people. And when I got this response, Susan, it was all me too, me too. It was my husband, my daughter, my mother, myself. That got me to doing the research. And what happens when people write comments to an essay or a blog post, they write a few sentences. Nowadays, they will find you online. And when they email you, you get a page and a half of what happened to them. So I started to get all these stories from people telling me what was happening. And that's when I have the background to do the research. And I started looking at why this was happening to so many people. That led to my first self-published book, The 55 Unemployed and Faking Normal. The book had been out about a year. It had done well. And I met with Simon & Schuster, and they said to me, we think this book needs a bigger platform. We can help you with that. So what I did was to add 70 or so pages to my self-published book, because at that point I had talked to many more people. I had many more resources I wanted to share. And so the new book is a second edition of my first book, an updated edition with more stories, updated data, etc.
Okay, so I may be reading too much into the title change, but it's also delightfully for you, I would imagine, got the muscle of Simon & Schuster Publishing behind it. That must count for a lot.
It does. I think their thinking was that underemployed, there are many people who are actually working. They're just in jobs that don't pay them nearly what they used to make. And they wanted the book to reach the audience that they thought would resonate with it. And when I described it as unemployed, they thought that narrowed it. Many older adults who have been jettisoned from the workplace. And right now we have the data that basically confirms what we know anecdotally, that over 50% of workers in their 50s are going to be pushed out of the workforce. They do get jobs, but only 10% get jobs at salaries like the ones they left. So people are working, but they're actually underemployed.
Yeah, and it's about 25%, isn't it? They get a quarter of the salaries they're used to, and they're really not doing decent jobs. It's, subsistence crumbs.
Right. This is why I think we have to really be vigilant when we hear these low unemployment numbers, to look behind the numbers. There's one I hear all the time that there's 6 million older adults have gotten jobs in the last decade. But when you look at the truth of that, over 50% of those jobs pay $15,000 for full-time work. So, we have a good jobs crisis, and the portrayal of older adults working, as you said, at a quarter of the salaries that they used to make, it's not often enough to live on.
This is pervasive across all the developed world. I did look at the job stats that were out in the States just this past Friday, and it's similar to the picture here. We've got the government here, when it can take its eye off this silly Brexit stuff, they're crowing about their record on job growth, and it's 0-hour contracts. If you work for 1 hour in a week, you're classed as being employed.
Exactly.
What I really like about your books, Elizabeth, aside from your searing honesty and your lean style, it's journalistic, is that you lay out the problem and you present solutions, resources. Let's hear about some of those, starting with the idea of smalling up.
So smalling up is recognizing that many of us are not going to be able to do all the impulse shopping and buying that we're accustomed to. It's really thinking about, in this new normal of financial insecurity, what does it really take for us to be content, to be rooted, to be happy? It's not about budgeting. It's about, what do you need for your contentment? So, for example, I have a friend who's a musician who buys raggedy cars, but he will spend thousands of dollars on a flute. A couple I know, they're foodies. They like to eat out. Maybe you don't like to eat out. You don't know why someone would spend money on that, but this is what brings them joy. But they don't get 2 entrees anymore. They will get 1 entree and divide it. Doing this occasionally is a way for them to feed something that is happiness for them.
Yes, it's their ritual.
It is their ritual. So many of us are going to have to think about, in our own lives, think about consumption in a different way than we have in the past. And this is where I think smalling up and actually the sustainability movement intersect, where the retirement income crisis and the sustainability movement intersect, because the economics of aging are going to force all of us to think differently about how we consume.
You also advise everyone to get off their throne.
What this means is, if you have lived a certain way, so for example, I have traveled internationally. I've even flown Concorde. I used to fly first class and business class. The last time I was in New York a couple of weeks ago, I had to be there on a Tuesday by noon. I took the bus. Was I not going to get to the meeting because I couldn't take the Excella to New York? No.
What's that, a 6-hour drive, D.C. to New York?
It's a train. It's
okay. But how long is the bus ride you took then?
5 hours.
Okay.
Another example, a dear friend of mine got married finally at 50, had a destination, a wedding. I wanted to go, couldn't afford to stay in the destination hotel, couldn't afford to fly to Savannah, drove down with a friend of mine, also faking normal, in her jalopy. We didn't stay in the sort of artist loft area downtown. Where our hotel was out with the car dealerships and the Waffle Houses. We had, it's where you get eggs under a heat lamp for breakfast. I had coffee with a dear friend of mine who was in town. We didn't have a $55 brunch. We had $5 coffee. We parked there for 3 hours, and it was still magical. I didn't buy a dress. I shopped in my closet, wore something I already had. Was I going to miss the wedding of a dear friend because I couldn't fly, couldn't stay in the destination hotel, etc.? It was still magical for me to be there. It was great seeing a friend I hadn't connected with. I had to get off my throne and find a way to do what I needed to do.
You have to surrender the formerly that's always looping in your head and live in what you are today, your new normal, your new identity.
Exactly. I think you've hit it exactly.
Now, I liked reading about the Top This game that you played with your friend or friends. You describe one friend in particular as a touchstone and sanity refuge. And that game, if you can explain it to us, then led to your really good idea of resilience circles.
Top This was this game. One friend and I, we would do this regularly. I might say my cell phone, my mobile phone's about to be cut off. And she would say her electricity was about to be cut off and she would win. So Top This was what was the disaster or the financial woe that was happening. Because we're so in the faking normal, you never share that. You never talk about what's happening financially. And so this was such a relief to have a few people I could tell the truth to. And then we made it a game of whose situation was worse. And I know it sounds like depressing, but it actually wasn't. It was a relief to have a few places where you could take the mask down.
And you weren't cat food under a bridge in a cardboard box yet.
No, I was not. And I always want to be really candid about where I was out of respect for people who are in much worse situations, because I'm hearing from them all the time.
What are you saying for other people to do? How do they rustle up their resilience circle?
I talk in the book a lot about how to form a resilience circle. People sometimes say to me, but I don't know many people. I'm not comfortable forming a circle. I say libraries have become these big community centers. They have book clubs. They have chess clubs. Work with your librarian who can get the book for you. You can get a room there. The book describes how to set up a circle. And that's one way. Churches often have these ministries to get out of debt and reach other financial goals. That's another place that you can get help and start a resilience circle in that setting as well.
What are your ideas, Elizabeth, on how we get back to being more age integrated, the way it was 100 years ago, not the segregation we see today with the warehousing of olders and the elderly in care homes?
So I think it's already beginning to happen. When you look at what's happening, for example, with multi-generational households, it is increasing dramatically post the Great Recession. And it used to be just immigrant families, but now it is everybody, where families are already recognizing that if you pool your resources, have 2 or more generations in a household, that the whole family can do better. What we need is for housing design to catch up with where we are. I had as I shared with you offline, a water main break. I'm staying now with a dear friend of mine with my grandson, and my water main, they actually fixed it about 4 days ago, but I'm feeling such camaraderie with her that I've actually stayed 4 more days.
Oh, nice.
We're all here. And it's building really community. My circle of women friends in particular, older women, we are, I heard someone say recently, each other's mental health insurance. But we need the housing to catch up with how we need to live so that there are spaces where we can gather. They don't even have to be big spaces, but if women and people are going to start living together, we see it in the US now, maybe it's there as well, this housing for millennials. They have common areas for kitchens, smaller rooms, activities.
That's happening
It's
here
really
quite a bit as well.
expensive here.
Yeah, very much here as well. common area, and the developers squeeze as much money as they can out of tacking on everyone in the room and dressing it up really beautifully. But similar things are happening here, and we're trying to get the age integration going. And I mean, you mentioned millennials, and they get so much stick wrongly for being entitled and lazy and all the rest. And we can credit a lot of millennials, Airbnb, I'm thinking Uber, all of this, for developing the sharing economy, which is of benefit to everyone across the age spectrum now.
I see the sharing economy as one part of an interesting work casserole. Is it sharing economy or sharing the crumbs economy? I think we could have probably a whole discussion on that. But I do see older adults starting to get into it. There are more Uber drivers over 50 than under 30. The fastest growing segment of Airbnb are women over 50 who are empty nesters renting out a bedroom. And this, I know in my friendship circle, a number of women, this is a key source of income for them.
Yeah, and so it's not just crumbs. Yeah. This is an option, and it has upsides and downsides, but at least it's now there.
It is there, but it is often not enough. And it's an option that I think sometimes people are forced into, because I'll hear older adults say to me that they're not getting nearly as many jobs as they need to really support themselves. For example, with me, I don't see myself getting a full-time with benefits traditional job again. I see myself cobbling together a casserole of interesting work. One component of it could be participating in the sharing economy, but it could include other things as well.
What are your thoughts on how we attract more action? There are a lot of grassroots cells out there shouting and screaming about all of this, but how do we attract more attention on all levels politically to allow for lifelong learning, for a redesign of the system so we can start tapping in to the renewable asset of older workers?
The point we were talking about earlier about recognizing that we're not alone, the reason that's important to me is that there's power in numbers. And there are a lot of us here who, because we don't know how large this retirement income crisis is, we're not putting the pressure on our institutions, our policymakers, our legislators to do something about this. For example, age discrimination laws were significantly weakened in 2009 by a Supreme Court decision. There's a bipartisan initiative in the U.S. to make them stronger again. But we are not pressuring Congress to make sure that happens. And we actually have the numbers to do it. Until we get the right story out, the right framing, the correct framing about what's happening, people feel really, I think, in despair and powerless.
And there is momentum building, though, isn't there?
It is. And it's partly what you're doing, what I'm doing, what Encore, we mentioned Marcy earlier, and many initiatives out there now starting to move the needle on this.
I think it's people like us in 50s, 60s, and we're rising up. We're feisty. We've always been feisty, and we're all stunned by the fact that the goalposts, as we were saying earlier, have been moved. And, the academics and the economists have indeed, I've had many on my show, they've been discussing this for the last 30 years. And now, finally, things are going mainstream because of your actions. And hopefully the big middle is a drop in the ocean, too. And Ashton Applewhite, amazing activism from her. So we're starting to get some traction, but we need to now scale it up.
And I think that with all that's happening, there's still what I call the positive aging, happy talk narrative is as strong as what we're trying to do. And what I mean by that is I think marketers, when I hear them talking about the longevity economy, they're not talking about affordability. Their focus, it seems to me, are on affluent boomers and their needs for leisure and high-end housing and all the rest of it. what I'd like to see happen is more discussion about the affordability issue and the millions of boomers who've landed here and are not going to be able to do the cool reinvention stories that we hear about. So I think that there is traction. I know Ashton well, and many of the people probably you've had on the show. And I think we are still kind of in an uphill battle mode, but more and more voices. I'm more optimistic now than I was 3 years ago when I started.
Well, me too, since I started this podcast, what was it, last October? I mean, the world is starting to wake up to the fact that we cannot have everyone over 70 who's still in relatively good health, maybe a few chronic little disease niggles, but nothing acute, mending and making do and starving on the streets when they are sharp of mind and still healthy, and economies. This is the biggie as well, which is the no-brainer element. Economies need their tax contributions.
Well, this is, I am so glad you said this, because this is, I don't even know where to begin with it. But the thing that strikes me, the over 50 segment of the population in the U.S. spends $7 trillion annually. If we're not working, I can take my coffee in a thermos. I can keep my 8-year-old Chevrolet. I can stop shopping for clothes. I can stop eating in restaurants. When you look at this $7 trillion spend that the plus 50 market accounts for, we're over 50% of the spend on apparel, on cars and trucks, on so many categories that I don't get how business doesn't understand that if we're not working, we don't have money to buy things. So there's the tax implication that you just spoke about, but there's also the bottom line impact if boomers or older adults are not working for decades. And I think sometimes we don't make that connection strongly enough.
Well, hopefully we're making enough noise and we can start shouting even louder about this. Elizabeth, I want to close with an interviewer's classic. I want you to finish these sentences. The first one, I'm impatient for ...
I'm impatient for a greater focus on companies that are grappling with the solution. I am less interested in hearing about what's not being done, the laggard companies that are going to never change. I want to hear about the companies that are right now building intergenerational work environments, what's working for them, what mistakes they've made. I want those companies to be held up and given a bigger megaphone so that we can learn from them. Because I think the private sector will have an important role to play in changing attitudes on aging.
The next sentence, I'm endlessly inspired by...
I'm inspired by podcasts like this one, so many people that I'm hearing from now, initiatives that are bubbling up, people trying things that they haven't tried before, older adults and younger adults. I'm inspired by, I think we're in the middle of a seismic shift, and that after this sort of shock, that I'm starting to see the needle move. I'm inspired by the power of the internet to connect us. I'm able to reach, and I am reached by so many people who are working on the same issues. We're finding ways to collaborate. All of that makes me hopeful for what's possible.
Next one for you, Elizabeth. Please finish this. My road ahead as an activist looks like what?
Getting the word out to as many people as possible. And I'd love to see Resilience Circle conversations happening all over the country. And I'm looking for ways to facilitate that.
I blow off stress by...
I go to the free gym, not too far from where I live. I'm on the treadmill there. Or I go to Potter's House, which is a neighborhood cafe that we consider also the neighborhood living room. It's comfortable in there. I see people I know. I run into people I like. And it's just part of my community.
Next one. My heart sings when I listen to this piece of music.
Anything by Carmen McRae. And if my grandson is there, it's even more special. He's 13, already 6'1",
Woo.
and I just adore him.
So you can have a little boogie.
Yes.
Next one, final one for you, Elizabeth. I'm okay with where I am now because...
The community that I have around me. My mother died almost a year ago, March last year. And a community wrapped itself around me like a blanket. It's made all the difference.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you for having me, Susan.
Elizabeth White's new book, 55, Underemployed and Faking Normal, is in all good bookstores and sites now, published by Simon & Schuster. Thank you for listening. Links to all in the show notes. And until next time, bye-bye.